Hi, my name is Amy, and I have been a missionary to Colombia, South America, full time for almost 30 years now. So let's talk about Colombia today, and let's talk about the mission field today. What are some of the things that Colombia or Colombians get right? I think that one of the things that happens where Colombia is concerned is that a lot of people have a negative impression that what's Colombia. They kind of sum it up in one lump sum that Colombia is are drugs and cartels and kidnapping and violence. But you know what? There are a lot of things that Colombians get right. And one of the things that Colombians get right is the way that they look at everyday life. Colombians have a way of looking at everyday life. They celebrate life. Birthdays are celebrated, accomplishments are celebrated. I'm not sure if Colombia is one of the countries that has the most holidays in the world, but if they're not one of the highest, they're right up here. They find reasons to take breaks and enjoy life. And another thing that I've noticed in Colombia is I think that Colombians have a healthier relationship where food is concerned. If you watched any of my videos, I did one of the videos where I took you kind of a short little walk through my neighborhood, and I showed you one of the neighborhood supermarkets, and there you could see all of the fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. This is a daily habit in Colombia that people buy their groceries sometimes daily, and they have a habit of using fresh ingredients to cook with. They'll make things almost, I would say, almost exclusively from fresh ingredients. Fresh fruits are always in season. Any small neighborhood or any neighborhood that you go into, you can find fresh produce at any time of the year here. And also because Colombia doesn't really have seasons, I guess that also helps a lot. One of the things that I always realize in the United States when I go back is that fresh food is almost more expensive, or it's usually more expensive than the processed food or the convenient food. Now, my mindset is American, and if I can do something that's more convenient to me and it's easier and it's faster, sign me up. I mean, that's just our culture. That's just the way we do things. But here in Colombia, it's actually the other way around. A lot of the processed foods, a lot of the convenient foods are actually much more expensive because a lot of them are imported. And also because fresh fruits and vegetables are so readily available here, and they're not as expensive, so they're more readily accessible in your neighborhood or in the grocery store. So most people opt for the fresh version, and you can really tell it when you live here. Those of you that have lived in Colombia or lived in another country like that, you can tell right away the difference in your food consumption and what you're eating. So that is one of the things that I do believe that Colombia gets right. Another thing that I think that Colombia gets right is coffee. If you've ever heard Colombia mentioned in a sentence, coffee is probably not too far away from being mentioned, because Colombia has the best coffee. Don't let anybody tell you any different, because it's not true. Colombia has the best coffee. But coffee here isn't just about coffee. As I told you last week in the questions that I answered, every region has a plate of food or a special food that is to that region. And coffee is the same here in Colombia. So different regions have different types of coffee. But coffee in Colombia is so much more than a drink. Colombians are not about the dessert style coffee. They're not about give me, 5 pumps of this and two flavors of this. They're about coffee. And coffee, many times, it's about conversation. It's about hospitality. It's about relationship. And Colombians believe that good coffee speaks for itself. They don't need a bunch of extras to enjoy a cup of coffee. So a lot of times, that coffee is going to mean a deep conversation, and people here linger around coffee. They enjoy the moment of sitting down and having a cup of coffee. And a third thing that I think that Colombia gets right is the pace of life. Life isn't lived at the same speed here. That's something that's very hard to get used to if you're not used to it. Life is much slower here in many aspects. People stop and talk, they visit with their neighbors. Like I said, they'll sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee in the middle of the day. And instead of drinking that coffee on the way to their next appointment, it's something that they actually sit down and they'll enjoy. And that's something in the culture that I think that I'm probably not as acclimated to as other things, because my gringa mind is, let's see how much we can get done and how fast we can get things done. That's the way I think. That's my culture. That's the way I think. And so a lot of times that way of thinking doesn't, it's really hard to change that. It's really hard to break that mindset and just slow down and enjoy life. And living in Colombia reminds me constantly that life isn't just about getting more done or getting things finished off of a checklist that we have to do. It's about paying attention to people that God has placed right in front of us. Sometimes we're so busy rushing to the next thing that we miss the conversations. We miss the divine interruptions, and we also get annoyed at interruptions when a lot of times it's God divinely interrupting us so that we will pay attention to things and to people that God has placed and opportunities that God has placed in our path. So those are a few things that I believe that Colombia actually gets right. I believe that there are things that are hard to get used to in many aspects, but there are also things that make life better if you pay attention to those cultural differences. If you will embrace those differences in culture, I think that it enriches your life to another level. Now, to end this video today with another question that I have been asked, and that I've also asked myself, and probably a lot of you have asked yourself, and that is, have you ever questioned whether you have heard God correctly? Now, you might think that someone like myself, who has lived on the mission field for over half of my life, who I very much believe that I have answered the call of God on my life, and I'm doing what God has asked me to do. And so you might think that I would never doubt that calling. But that's actually not true. There have been many moments where I have absolutely questioned whether I heard God correctly. And I think difficult seasons and difficult moments and difficult circumstances have a way of making us question what we were once so certain of. There are days you can ask me, and I am so certain that this is where I'm supposed to be, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then you could ask me a couple weeks later, and I think, I question myself and think, have I totally missed what God wants to do in my life? Because as I've talked to you guys in other videos, it's hard sometimes. Life is hard anywhere and everywhere sometimes. So I think that because of the fact that we question those things many times, it doesn't mean that God has changed his mind. And one of the things that I've been learning is that faith isn't the absence of questions. It's actually choosing to keep walking even when we don't have the answer to those questions that we're asking. And one of the things that God has been teaching me very recently is that faith isn't pretending that reality doesn't exist. I think that sometimes in some churches or some doctrines, we've been taught that faith means that you need to deny what is right in front of you. But I don't think that that's biblical faith. I don't think that that is correct, and I don't think that it's biblical faith. It's my own opinion. I think that faith looks in the face of reality, but it refuses to believe that reality has the final word. That's what I think faith is. I think that we see part of a reality, which is the earthly reality, but there is a complete reality, and that is seeing earthly reality and also knowing that there is something much more than what we can see in front of us right now. So this reminds me of the story of Elisha and his servant. Elisha and his servant were surrounded by the enemy's army. And if we put it in modern day terms, Elisha's servant was freaking out. He was freaking out because he could see the reality of what was around them, that was what was surrounding them, both of them, and he couldn't see a way out. And so if you will pay attention to this story, Elisha didn't tell him that he needed to have more faith. He didn't tell him that you're just imagining this. He didn't tell him, don't look at this reality. He prayed and he asked God to open his servant's eyes. And when God opened his servant's eyes, the servant could see the godly reality, the army of the Lord that was surrounding him, the fires and the chariot and the horses and the angels. So he didn't ignore what was in front of him, but he saw a greater reality, because there's always a complete reality. There's always something more than what we're seeing right in front of us. And what happened is that his reality didn't change, his perspective changed. And we all know the Bible verse in Hebrews 11:1 that says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen." We all know that Bible verse. That's the faith Bible verse. But faith doesn't deny what is seen. It gives us confidence that what is unseen is just as real even before our eyes can perceive it. That's what faith is. That's what faith does. It doesn't ignore what we can see. It trusts that God is at work in ways that we cannot see. And what we're looking at, it's real, but it isn't the whole picture. It's not the complete reality. So again, I always want to encourage you in these videos. I want you to encourage you to go deeper in your seeking of the Lord. And if you're struggling with your faith today, I pray that you will realize that faith it's not ignoring what's in front of you, but it's believing that there is much more than what you're seeing right now. It's believing that even though you may feel surrounded by the enemy today, that there is a greater reality, and that is God that is surrounding you, the heavenly armies that are surrounding you, and there is a way out for you, and God is making that way out, and He will use your faith to help you see and to help you believe that your circumstance and your reality right now does not have the final say. So thank you so much again for watching today. Those of you who are sharing, those of you who are subscribing, I really, really appreciate it. Don't forget to keep seeking and to stay ready, and I will see you next week.